Picture this. You're watching underwater cameras descend 830 feet into the Aegean Sea when suddenly, 3 massive chunks of twisted metal appear in the darkness. This isn't just any shipwreck. This is HMS Trooper, torn apart 81 years ago. And what investigators found inside these fragments will absolutely blow your mind. We're talking about discoveries so bizarre, so perfectly preserved, and so haunting that they've left marine archaeologists scratching their heads and families finally getting answers they've waited 8 decades to hear. You think you know what happens when a submarine explodes? Think again. What the ocean did to HMS Trooper, and what it chose to preserve, defies everything we understand about destruction and time. HMS Trooper wasn't just sunk. She was ripped into 3 distinct pieces, each one preserving a different moment of absolute chaos. And I'm not talking about a clean break here. When Greek researchers first laid eyes on this wreck in 2024, they were staring at something that looked like a giant invisible hand had grabbed a 275-foot submarine and yanked her apart mid-scream. But the way she was torn apart tells us something terrifying about what happened in those final seconds. The bow section sits upright on the seabed, almost defiant, with her torpedo tube still intact and pointing forward like she's still hunting for targets that will never come. It's an eerie sight. This front third of a submarine looking almost normal, almost ready for action, except for the jagged metal where the rest of her used to be. Then there's the middle section, and here's where things get really disturbing. This part of HMS Trooper, where the crew lived, ate, slept, and probably died, is completely obliterated. We're talking about total annihilation. The accommodation quarters where 64 men called home for months at a time, gone. Just scattered debris and twisted metal fragments spread across the seabed like confetti from hell. And the stern section. It lies separately, about 150 feet away from where it should be, like someone picked it up and tossed it aside. The propellers are still there, still attached, but they'll never turn again. They're frozen in a position that suggests the submarine was making headway when the explosion hit, still moving forward into whatever fate was waiting. What's really crazy is what the explosion left untouched, while destroying everything else around it. When you see a submarine split this cleanly into 3 pieces, you're not looking at a normal torpedo hit or even a collision. This was something so violent it defied physics, yet somehow preserved the most impossible details in ways that make absolutely no sense. Think about it this way. If you took a sledgehammer to a watch, you'd expect everything to be destroyed, right? But imagine if the explosion was so precise that it shattered the case, destroyed the gears, but left the hands pointing to the exact time of impact. That's essentially what happened to HMS Trooper, except instead of watch hands, we're talking about much larger, much more disturbing details. The way these 3 sections landed on the seabed tells a story of incredible violence. The Greek research team that discovered her said it was like finding pieces of a jigsaw puzzle scattered by a hurricane, except this puzzle used to contain human lives, dreams, fears, and final thoughts. Each piece landed in a different position, creating a debris field that stretches across the ocean floor like a graveyard of ambitions. HMS Trooper was on a routine secret mission in 1943 when she sailed straight into a nightmare that would keep her hidden for the next 81 years. Let me paint you a quick picture of how a perfectly normal day turned into a maritime tragedy that still gives investigators chills. The mission itself was simple, but the location was a death trap that nobody saw coming. Lieutenant John Wraith commanded this T-class submarine from Beirut, carrying what might have been the most dangerous cargo in the Mediterranean: 3 Greek resistance agents, bags of gold coins, weapons, and supplies for fighters behind Nazi lines. These weren't just any passengers. They were essentially living, breathing hopes for Greek freedom. The route took them through the Aegean Sea, which in 1943 was basically a floating minefield with Nazi patrol boats thrown in for good measure. HMS Trooper had to navigate between islands crawling with German forces, avoid detection, and complete her mission without getting blown to pieces. She'd done it 7 times before. The 8th time would be different. After successfully dropping off the 3 agents near Danusa, men who would live to fight another day while their deliverers sailed toward death, HMS Trooper began what should have been a routine patrol between Ikaria and Danusa. Just another day at the office for a submarine crew who'd been playing this deadly game for months. What happened next created the most puzzling wreck discoveries ever recorded in submarine warfare. A single German mine, probably laid by the mine layer Drac weeks earlier, was floating just beneath the surface like a metal death sentence waiting for the right victim. HMS Trooper surfaced right into it. But here's where things get really weird about what that mine did to 64 human beings and their submarine home. The explosion didn't just sink HMS Trooper. It created a time capsule of their final moments that preserved evidence in ways that make no sense until you see it with your own eyes. The most chilling discovery wasn't what was destroyed. It was what remained perfectly intact, frozen in time like a photograph of someone's last living moment. And I'm talking about details so specific, so perfectly preserved, that they've given investigators nightmares and families a kind of closure they never expected to receive. The conning tower hatch tells a story that will give you goosebumps every time you think about it. After 81 years underwater, in the corrosive salt water of the Aegean Sea, investigators found the conning tower hatch standing wide open, frozen exactly as it was the moment the mine exploded. Not partially open, not damaged open, deliberately, intentionally open, like someone had just stepped through it. That open hatch reveals something absolutely haunting about the final moments aboard HMS Trooper. When a submarine's hatch is open during wartime in enemy waters, it means only one thing. The crew felt completely safe. These 64 men were breathing fresh Mediterranean air, probably enjoying the breeze after hours in recycled submarine atmosphere, completely unaware that death was floating just a few feet beneath their hull. Picture this scene for a moment. It's 1943. You're in the middle of a war zone. You've just completed a successful secret mission, and you finally feel safe enough to open the hatch and get some real air. Maybe someone was on watch, scanning the horizon for threats that they'd never see coming. Maybe others were just grateful for a moment of peace in what had been months of underwater tension. The preservation of that open hatch is like finding a doorway to the past that nobody closed. It's evidence of trust, of human beings feeling secure enough to be vulnerable, right before the ocean claimed them forever. Maritime archaeologists say they've never seen anything quite like it. A piece of evidence so perfectly preserved that it captures not just physical details, but emotional states. When you think about submarine warfare, you imagine crews trapped underwater, suffocating in metal tubes, fighting claustrophobia and fear. But HMS Trooper's open hatch tells a different story. These men died under open skies, breathing free air, probably never knowing what hit them. There's something almost merciful about that, and something absolutely heartbreaking. The hatch mechanism itself shows no signs of damage from the explosion. It's not bent, not torn, not forced open by the blast. It was opened by human hands, probably just minutes before those same hands were silenced forever. The wheel that opens and closes it still moves freely, as if someone just stepped away and is planning to come right back. But the hatch isn't the only thing that makes no sense about what the explosion preserved and what it destroyed. Deep inside the wreck, investigators found something that will make you question everything you know about final moments and the strange ways that catastrophic events can freeze time itself. Deep inside the wreck, investigators found an engine telegraph frozen at half a head, like HMS Trooper was still trying to move forward 81 years after her crew died, trying to get her home. And this isn't just some random broken instrument we're talking about. This is the submarine's command center, the mechanical brain that translated human decisions into submarine movement. This telegraph discovery is going to mess with your head because of what it represents. The brass handle points to half a head, meaning the last order given aboard HMS Trooper was to maintain cruising speed, moving forward with confidence, completely unaware of the mine waiting just ahead. Someone turned that handle believing they had a future, not knowing they had seconds. Think about what that means for a minute. The engine telegraph is like the steering wheel of a car. It only moves when someone deliberately moves it. This wasn't accidentally set to half ahead by the explosion. A human being, probably Lieutenant Wraith himself, gave that final order with full expectation that his submarine would respond, that his crew would continue their patrol, that they'd all see another sunrise. It's like finding a clock stopped at the exact moment someone died, except this clock was stopped by human hands making human decisions. The telegraph represents the final conscious thought process aboard HMS Trooper, the last time someone believed they were in control of their destiny, rather than sailing straight into it. What makes this discovery even more eerie is the condition of the telegraph itself. After 8 decades underwater, the brass fittings still gleam when lights hit them. The engraved markings are still clearly readable: full ahead, half ahead, slow ahead, stop, slow astern. Each setting represents a choice that will never be made again, orders that will never be given, speeds that will never be reached. The telegraph sits in what used to be the control room, surrounded by the twisted remains of other instruments that didn't survive the blast. Depth gauges are shattered, compasses are destroyed, but this one piece of equipment that captured the crew's final intention remains perfectly preserved. It's like the ocean decided to keep a record of their last conscious moment, while erasing everything else about who they were. Marine archaeologists who've studied the wreck say the telegraph's position suggests the submarine was maintaining a steady patrol speed when the mine detonated. This wasn't a submarine running for its life or trying to escape danger. This was a confident crew moving through waters they believed were safe, making routine decisions about routine speed for what they thought was a routine patrol. But if you think finding a telegraph frozen in time is eerie, wait until you hear about what vanished completely from the wreck site. We're talking about massive pieces of equipment that should be impossible to lose, yet somehow disappeared without a trace in ways that have investigators completely baffled. HMS Trooper's 4-inch deck gun, weighing several tons of solid steel, has completely disappeared without a trace, and nobody can figure out where the hell it went. We're not talking about a missing tool or a lost piece of equipment here. We're talking about a naval cannon that takes multiple men to operate and weighs more than a small car. The gun mounting is still there on the deck, bolted down and intact, but the massive weapon itself vanished like it was never there in the first place. The mounting points where the gun was attached show evidence of violent separation, but there's no sign of the gun anywhere in the debris field. It's like someone reached down and plucked a multi-ton piece of military hardware out of existence. Let me put this in perspective for you. A 4-inch naval gun isn't something that just gets misplaced. These weapons are designed to withstand the stress of firing explosive shells at enemy targets. They're built to absorb recoil forces that would destroy smaller equipment. They're made to last through naval battles, storms, and decades of use. Yet somehow, one mine blast made this incredibly robust piece of equipment vanish into thin air. Investigators have 3 theories about what happened to HMS Trooper's missing gun, and honestly, all of them sound impossible. First theory: the blast was so violent that it launched a multi-ton gun into the abyss, sending it flying so far from the wreck site that it landed outside the search area. Imagine an explosion powerful enough to turn naval artillery into a projectile. Second theory: the gun was completely vaporized by the mine explosion. But for that to happen, we're talking about forces that would have obliterated the entire submarine, not just selectively destroyed one weapon while leaving other delicate equipment intact. The physics don't add up. Third theory: the gun broke free during the sinking process and rolled away across the seabed, coming to rest somewhere beyond the main debris field. But the mounting evidence suggests violent separation at the moment of explosion, not a gradual break during the descent. Here's what really messes with investigators' heads. While this massive, durable piece of military hardware disappeared completely, delicate instruments and fragile components survived the same explosion that supposedly destroyed tons of hardened steel. It's like the blast had selective vision, choosing what to preserve and what to erase based on some logic that makes no sense to anyone studying the wreck. The missing gun represents one of the most puzzling aspects of HMS Trooper's destruction. Naval historians say they've never seen anything quite like it. A weapon designed to withstand war simply vanishing, while much more fragile equipment remains perfectly intact. It's one of those mysteries that makes you question whether we really understand what happened in those final seconds. You can't just misplace a naval cannon. Either the explosion was so violent it violated the laws of physics, or something even stranger happened that night in the Aegean Sea. The really crazy part is what the explosion didn't destroy. Which brings us to discoveries that will make you question everything you think you know about underwater preservation. While crew quarters were obliterated and multi-ton cannons vanished, HMS Trooper's direction finder antenna sits on the seabed looking like it was installed yesterday. And this discovery is going to completely mess with your understanding of how destruction works. We're talking about delicate electronic equipment that should have been the first thing destroyed, yet somehow became the most perfectly preserved artifact on the entire wreck. This direction finder antenna isn't just sort of intact or recognizably damaged. The intricate components remain pristine and identifiable, with wire connections still visible and mounting brackets still properly aligned. After 81 years of saltwater corrosion, storm damage, and marine life interaction, this antenna looks like it could still pick up radio signals if someone connected power to it. Let me explain why this makes absolutely no sense. Direction finder antennas are essentially sophisticated radio equipment designed to help submarines navigate by detecting radio beacons from known locations. They're made of delicate wires, sensitive components, and precision-calibrated parts that can be damaged by rough handling, let alone underwater explosions. These aren't military-grade weapons built to withstand combat. They're scientific instruments built for accuracy. Yet, while the accommodation area where 64 men lived and died was completely erased by the blast, this fragile piece of navigation equipment survived without a scratch. It's like the explosion had a twisted sense of humor, preserving the tools needed to find your way while destroying the people who knew how to use them. The preservation is so perfect that investigators can still read manufacturer markings on some components. Serial numbers that were etched into metal brackets in 1942 are still clearly visible. Wire insulation that should have degraded decades ago still covers the electrical connections. It's like this one piece of equipment existed in a protective bubble, while everything around it was destroyed. Marine archaeologists studying the wreck say the antenna's condition defies every prediction model they have for underwater preservation. In normal circumstances, delicate electronic equipment is among the first things to deteriorate in salt water. Electrical components corrode, wires break down, precision parts become unrecognizable. Yet, HMS Trooper's antenna looks like it was removed from service last week, not 8 decades ago. What makes this discovery even more haunting is its location on the wreck. The antenna sits in an area that shows obvious blast damage, twisted metal, scattered debris, evidence of incredible destructive force. Yet, in the middle of all that chaos, this one delicate instrument remained untouched, like it was protected by something beyond physical laws. The irony is almost cruel when you think about it. The sea preserved the instruments of navigation while destroying the navigators. It kept the tools of war while claiming the warriors. HMS Trooper's direction finder antenna can still theoretically help someone find their way, but the men who knew how to use it are gone forever. This selective preservation extends beyond just the antenna. Other sensitive equipment throughout the wreck shows similar impossible survival, creating a pattern that has investigators questioning everything they thought they knew about explosive destruction underwater. But the most haunting discovery is still waiting in the darkness, separated from the main wreck like a monument to final moments. HMS Trooper's conning tower didn't sink with the ship. It was blown clean off, and now lies separately on the seabed like a decapitated head, preserving the bridge where Lieutenant Wraith made his final decisions in a way that will haunt you long after you learn about it. This isn't just structural damage we're talking about. This is the command center of a submarine, the brain of the operation. Sitting alone in the dark like a monument to leadership under pressure, the tower sits upright nearby, completely detached from the hull but perfectly positioned, as if it gently settled onto the seabed, rather than being violently separated by an explosion that killed 64 men in seconds. The periscopes are still there, still functional looking, still pointing in directions that made sense 81 years ago, but mean nothing now. This detached conning tower represents something that's going to stick with you, It's the last place human thoughts occurred aboard HMS Trooper. Whatever orders Lieutenant Wraith was considering, whatever fears or hopes crossed his mind, whatever final prayers or curses filled his thoughts, they all happened in that metal chamber, now sitting alone on the ocean floor, separated from everything it once controlled. The preservation inside the conning tower is eerily complete. The helm wheel that steered the submarine still turns freely. The compass housing, though flooded, remains intact with its brass fittings gleaming when lights hit them. Chart tables where navigation decisions were made still have their metal surfaces visible, though any paper charts rotted away decades ago. It's like finding someone's office perfectly preserved 81 years after they died at their desk. What's really disturbing is how the tower separated from the hull. The metal shows signs of violent tearing, but the tower itself landed upright and intact, suggesting the explosion was powerful enough to rip it free, but somehow gentle enough not to destroy it completely. The physics of this kind of selective destruction puzzle experts who study underwater explosions. Standing inside that conning tower through ROV cameras, you're essentially standing where Lieutenant Wraith stood when he made his last command decisions. The viewports he looked through are still there. The communication equipment he used to talk to his crew is still mounted on the bulkheads. The compass he relied on for navigation still sits in its housing, though its needle points nowhere useful now. The emotional weight of this discovery hit the investigation team hard. One researcher described it as finding the captain's chair on the Titanic, still facing the direction he was looking when she went down. It's that level of preserved human presence that makes the conning tower discovery so powerful and so disturbing. The tower's separation also preserved details about HMS Trooper's final moments that would have been lost if it had stayed attached to the hull. Investigators can see exactly how the submarine was positioned when the mine detonated, what direction she was heading, even estimate her speed based on how the tower landed relative to the main hull sections. But here's what really gets to you about this severed conning tower. It's sitting there like a tombstone marking not just where 64 men died, but where 64 sets of hopes, fears, dreams, and final thoughts were silenced forever. Every decision Lieutenant Wraith made in that tower was made, believing he had a future, believing his crew had a future, believing their mission mattered in ways that would extend beyond whatever happened next. Some questions don't have answers, only echoes that ripple through decades of silence. The detached conning tower of HMS Trooper is one of those echoes, sitting in the dark, preserving the final command post of men who commanded nothing except their own courage in the face of death they never saw coming. What these discoveries teach us about death, preservation, and the ocean's strange sense of justice will stay with you forever, because HMS Trooper's wreck isn't just a historical artifact. It's a master class in how catastrophic violence can create the most delicate preservation, how destruction can become a form of accidental art that captures human moments better than any photograph. The pattern of what survived and what didn't defies everything we understand about explosive destruction. Massive, durable military equipment vanished without a trace, while delicate electronic components emerged from 8 decades underwater, looking factory fresh. Living quarters where men ate, slept, and shared their fears were completely obliterated, while precision instruments designed to help them find their way home remained perfectly intact. It's like the explosion and the ocean worked together to create a very specific kind of memorial, one that preserved not just physical objects, but emotional states. The open hatch captures trust and vulnerability. The engine telegraph captures final decisions made with confidence. The pristine antenna captures the tools of survival, outlasting the people who needed them. The severed conning tower captures leadership separated from everything it once controlled. Each discovery tells part of a larger story about how quickly human ambitions can be interrupted and how strangely they can be preserved. HMS Trooper's crew went from feeling safe enough to open their hatch to being scattered across the seabed in seconds. But somehow their final moments were frozen in metal and machinery, in ways that let us witness their humanity 81 years later. The wreck has given investigators and families answers they waited 8 decades to receive. But it's also raised questions that may never be answered. Why did some equipment survive while other equipment vanished? How did delicate instruments withstand forces that destroyed reinforced military hardware? What were the crew's actual final thoughts as they enjoyed fresh air seconds before the mine detonated? Lieutenant John Wraith's son, Richard, spent 80 years wondering about his father's final mission, and the wreck discoveries finally gave him peace by proving the mission succeeded before the mine claimed their lives. But Richard's peace came with new questions about the strange ways that tragedy can create its own forms of preservation and memory. The Greek research team that discovered HMS Trooper described finding the wreck as like opening a time capsule that someone filled with contradictions. Every section they explored presented new evidence that challenged their understanding of how underwater explosions affect submarines and their contents. The selective preservation seemed almost intentional, as if something decided what parts of the story deserved to survive. HMS Trooper now serves as an undisturbed war grave, protected by Greek law and respected by the international diving community. The submarine has become a home for marine life that doesn't understand the historical significance of swimming through spaces where human dreams once thrived. Fish move through the torpedo tubes where weapons were once stored. Sea plants grow from bulkheads where men once slept. The ocean has reclaimed HMS Trooper in ways that seem both respectful and indifferent, creating new life around the remnants of interrupted lives. The wreck sits in eternal watch over waters where other vessels continue to pass, carrying other crews who face their own unknown futures with the same confidence that carried Lieutenant Wraith's crew toward their fate. What happened to HMS Trooper and her crew represents something larger about how war interrupts human stories, and how the ocean preserves those interruptions in ways we're still trying to understand. The discoveries from this wreck will influence how investigators approach other submarine mysteries, but they'll also serve as reminders that some questions about final moments and human courage can only be answered by the silence that follows. The most haunting question isn't how these men died, it's what they were thinking about in those final seconds when the hatch was open. The engine telegraph was set for half ahead, and the future seemed as certain as the Mediterranean breeze filling their lungs. Those thoughts went down with HMS Trooper, and will stay down with her, preserved in the only place where such thoughts belong, in the memories of those who choose to honor them. What's the wildest shipwreck discovery you've ever heard about? Share your thoughts below, and let's solve more ocean mysteries together.